There are moments in life when everything seems normal, quiet, even peaceful. But in an instant, your world can turn upside down. That's what happened to me. One minute I was enjoying the sound of rain. The next, well, let's just say, I'll never look at rainy nights the same way again. It all began the night I moved into my new apartment. I had just moved into a new apartment that day. I was excited. Starting fresh, a new chapter. The apartment itself wasn't fancy. It was located on the 4th floor of this old building that had probably seen better days. But I didn't care. It was mine. It had a kind of charm, the creaky wooden floors, the high ceilings, and especially the large window in the living room that overlooked the street below. I had always loved the rain, and that night, the rain was falling hard, creating a soothing rhythm against the glass. It felt like the perfect soundtrack to wind down after a long, exhausting day of unpacking. As the rain drummed against the windows, I decided to sit down on the couch with a cup of tea, watching the world outside blur beneath the heavy downpour. The warm glow of my reading lamp lit the room, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful, safe. That's when I saw him for the first time. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just a guy standing in the rain, probably waiting for a bus or a taxi. I mean, it's not unusual to see people hanging around the street late at night, right? But something about the way he was standing, so still, caught my attention. It wasn't like he was in a hurry to get anywhere. He wasn't fidgeting or checking his phone. He was just staring. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the hood, but his posture, it was unsettling. He didn't move, not an inch, just stood there, as if the rain didn't bother him at all. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just lost in thought, or maybe he was waiting for someone. I turned away, refocusing on my tea, telling myself that I was just tired from the move. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't help but glance back out the window. He was still there. My heart started to beat a little faster. I was trying to make sense of it. Why would anyone just stand there in the rain like that? And why was he staring at my building? My apartment, even? I started feeling this creeping sense of unease in the pit of my stomach, like something wasn't right. I stood up and walked over to the window. For a moment, I thought about closing the curtains, shutting him out, but my curiosity got the better of me. I peeked out again, hoping he'd be gone. But no, he hadn't moved. Still standing there, still staring. It was then that I noticed something else that made my skin crawl. He had turned slightly. Not enough to show his face, but now I could tell. He wasn't looking at my building. He was looking at me. The logical part of my brain was trying to reason with me. There's no way he could see me from down there. Not with the rain, not with the glare on the window. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I could feel his eyes on me, watching me, even though I couldn't see his face. I pulled the curtain shut, my hands trembling. I took a few deep breaths, telling myself it was just a coincidence, just some guy standing in the rain. But no matter how hard I tried to shake the feeling, I couldn't get rid of that creeping dread. The rain kept falling, harder now, the sound growing louder against the window. I tried to focus on something else, anything else. I picked up my phone, scrolled through social media, put on some music, but nothing could drown out the unease gnawing at the back of my mind. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I mean, it had to be, right? I was on the 4th floor. There's no way someone could be knocking on my window. But then, I heard it again. Soft, deliberate, coming from the window. My blood turned to ice. I stood there, frozen, not daring to move. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest that I thought it might burst. Slowly, I turned toward the window, my feet feeling like they were glued to the floor. The curtain was still drawn, but I could hear the knocking clear as day now. It was impossible. How could someone be knocking on my window? My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just a tree branch, or maybe the wind was playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew. I knew it wasn't the wind. I knew it wasn't a tree. I took a step toward the window, my breath shallow and ragged. My hand reached for the curtain, but I hesitated. What if he was there? What if somehow he had climbed up to my window? My mind flashed with images of him scaling the building like some kind of nightmare, his face pressed against the glass, waiting for me to look. I couldn't take it anymore. I yanked the curtain open, and my heart stopped. He was there. His face was right there, inches from the glass. The rain was pouring down, but I could see him clearly now. His eyes, wide, unblinking, staring straight at me. His lips twisted into the most disturbing, unnatural smile I had ever seen. It was as if his face was a mask, stretched and frozen into that horrifying grin. My throat went dry and I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I was paralyzed, trapped in his gaze. I don't know how long I stood there staring at him, my mind blank with terror. Seconds? Minutes? It felt like an eternity. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. I stumbled back, my heart racing, gasping for breath. I slammed the curtain shut, hands shaking uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do. Was it real? Had I imagined it? No, I couldn't have. He was there. I saw him. I felt him watching me. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. They sent someone over to check the building, but when they arrived, they found nothing. No sign of anyone outside, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had even been there. They assured me it was probably just some prank, maybe a kid messing around. But I knew better. I knew what I saw. After the police left, I sat on the couch, my mind spinning. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, that awful, twisted smile staring at me through the window. The days that followed were a blur. I tried to get back to normal, tried to convince myself that it was just a one-time thing. But the fear never really went away. Every time it rained, I felt that familiar chill run down my spine. I'd find myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see him there again. And sometimes, on those quiet, rainy nights, I still hear it. You think you're alone sometimes, when no one's around, when everything's quiet. But what if you weren't? What if something, or someone, was always watching you, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known? This is my story. The night I realized I was never truly alone. It was late, around midnight. I had just left my friend's house after a movie night. The rain had started just as I stepped out the door, and I cursed myself for not bringing an umbrella. The walk home wasn't long, maybe 10 minutes, but the rain was coming down hard, and within seconds, I was already soaked. I pulled up my hoodie, shoving my hands into my pockets as I started walking. The streets were almost empty, just the occasional car passing by, headlights cutting through the rain. There was something about the quiet, the emptiness, that felt eerie that night, like the rain had driven everyone indoors, leaving the city abandoned. The route I usually took home was through this narrow alleyway. It wasn't dangerous or anything, just a shortcut to shave a few minutes off my walk. I'd walked through it 100 times before, never giving it much thought. But that night felt different. I hesitated at the entrance of the alley, something about it giving me pause. The darkness seemed heavier, more oppressive than usual. The rain muffled everything, making the world feel distant, as if I were walking through a dream. But I told myself I was just being paranoid. It was late, I was tired, and I wanted to get home. So I took a deep breath and stepped into the alley, my footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. At first, everything seemed normal. Just me and the rain, the rhythmic tap of water against the ground keeping me company. But after a few steps, I felt it. This strange, crawling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone's eyes were on me. I stopped walking for a moment, glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind me. But the alley was empty. Just the rain, the flickering street lamp, and the faint sound of distant traffic. There was no one there. I shook my head, laughing at myself. I was being ridiculous. There was no one following me. But still, the feeling lingered, that strange, unsettling sensation of being watched. I started walking again, picking up the pace, eager to get out of the alley. My footsteps were quick, splashing against the puddles that had formed in the uneven pavement. But no matter how fast I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there. And then, I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the sound of my own footsteps, distorted by the rain. But then I heard it again. Another footstep, this time closer, louder. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing. Slowly, I turned around, my eyes scanning the alley, searching for the source of the sound. But again, there was nothing. No movement, no shadow, no figure lurking in the darkness. Just empty space. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my pulse quicken. The rain seemed louder now, almost deafening in the silence of the alley. I stood there for what felt like minutes, just staring into the darkness, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. With a shaky breath, I turned back around, telling myself it was just the rain playing tricks on me. Maybe the sound was bouncing off the walls of the alley, creating an echo, or maybe I was just being paranoid. Either way, I needed to get home. As I walked, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run. But I didn't. I didn't want to look scared, even though I was terrified. And then, just as I was about to reach the end of the alley, I heard it again. A breath. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. It was right behind me. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest, expecting to see someone standing there. But again, there was nothing. Just the rain, the alley, and the flickering streetlight. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. I had heard it. Someone was there. Someone was following me. I backed up slowly, my eyes scanning the darkness, trying to find any sign of movement. My breath was shallow, my hands trembling. I felt like a cornered animal, trapped in the narrow alley with no way out. And then, just as I was about to turn and run, I saw it. A figure, just barely visible in the shadows, standing at the far end of the alley. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection off the wet pavement. But no, it was real. There was someone there watching me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I was frozen, trapped in place, unable to move. The figure didn't move either. It just stood there, staring at me. I couldn't make out any features, just the vague outline of a person, their face hidden in the shadows. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it, but it felt like an eternity. And then, without warning, the figure took a step forward. Sometimes the things we fear the most aren't the ones we can see. Sometimes it's the things we can't see. the ones lurking just outside the edge of our vision, that terrify us the most. This is the story of the night I learned that not all knocks are meant to be answered. It was a stormy night, the kind that makes you want to curl up in bed and forget the world outside. I had been home alone for most of the day, enjoying the rare peace and quiet. My parents were out of town, and I had the house to myself. The rain had started in the late afternoon, gradually building into a full-blown storm by evening. Thunder rolled in the distance, and flashes of lightning occasionally lit up the room. I didn't mind the storm, though. In fact, I usually loved it. The sound of rain had always calmed me. But that night, the storm felt different. I was sitting in my room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, when I heard the first knock. It was soft, barely audible over the rain, but distinct enough to make me stop and listen. I sat up, my heart skipping a beat. Was that a knock? I waited, straining to hear over the sound of the storm. For a moment, there was nothing but the rain tapping against the window, the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. But then, I heard it again. It was unmistakable this time. A soft, deliberate knock coming from somewhere downstairs. I frowned, confused. Who would be knocking at my door this late, in the middle of a storm? I wasn't expecting anyone, and my parents weren't due back until the next day. I stood up, my heart racing slightly. Maybe it was one of the neighbors, or maybe someone's car had broken down in the storm and they needed help. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was nothing to be afraid of. But something about the knock felt wrong. I made my way downstairs, the house eerily quiet despite the storm raging outside. The rain was louder now, pounding against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees outside. The entire house felt colder, as if the storm had crept inside somehow. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated, listening again for the knock. But this time, there was nothing, just the sound of the storm. I walked to the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered through the peephole, expecting to see someone standing there, drenched from the rain. But there was no one. I frowned, stepping back from the door. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe I had imagined it. I was about to turn around and head back upstairs when I heard it again. This time it was louder, more urgent. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I whipped around, staring at the door, my breath catching in my throat. Someone was definitely there. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Should I open it? Should I call someone? Before I could decide, another knock echoed through the house. With a deep breath, I opened the door, bracing myself for whatever or whoever was on the other side. But when I looked outside, there was no one there. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stared out into the storm, my mind struggling to make sense of it. There was no one outside, no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me, my hands shaking. Something wasn't right. Someone had knocked on the door, I was sure of it. But where had they gone? I stood there for a moment, trying to calm myself down, telling myself it was just a prank, maybe some kids messing around. But deep down, I knew better. The knock had been too deliberate, too precise. Whoever or whatever had knocked, they hadn't been human. I made my way back upstairs, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. They were faint, almost drowned out by the storm, but unmistakable. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from downstairs. My blood turned to ice. There was someone in the house. I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, my mind racing. How could someone have gotten inside? I had locked the door behind me. There was no way anyone could have entered without me hearing. But the footsteps continued, growing louder, closer. I backed up slowly, my eyes scanning the darkened hallway, searching for any sign of movement. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And then, just as I was about to run, I heard it. The knock was coming from inside the house. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing down the hallway as I bolted for my room. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it tight, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I pressed my back against the door, listening, waiting. The knocking had stopped, but the footsteps, they were still there. Slow, deliberate, moving closer. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking as I dialed the police. My heart was racing, my mind struggling to make sense of it all. How could someone be inside the house? How had they gotten in? As I waited for the call to connect, I heard it again. This time the knock was right outside my door. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen with terror, waiting for the door to burst open. But it didn't. Instead, the footsteps stopped. The knocking ceased, and the house fell silent. I don't know how long I stood there waiting for something to happen. Minutes, hours. It felt like an eternity. But eventually, the police arrived. They searched the house from top to bottom, but they found nothing. No sign of anyone, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. They told me it was probably just the storm, that I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew better. I knew what I had heard. And every time it rains, I still hear it.